Islamic leaders make the following claims about the Quran. Muhammad perfectly memorized the Quran. He simply dictated the Quran to his followers, who memorized it and wrote it down with no editing. Muhammad examined and approved what was written. There has only ever been one version of the Quran. All Qur'ans are identical with no variants. The Quran is perfectly preserved. These claims are proved by history. The Quran is superior to other scriptures in its preservation, and hence in its message about God. All these claims are false and are lies that Muslims are always told by their religious leaders. Thanks to the internet and a lot of Muslims that have left Islam, the real Islam is being exposed every day, and most Muslims are now living in denial of the truth about their so-called holy book. Watch this clip and see how Islam is a religion of deceit and lies. This cannot be a religion that Jesus would like to be associated with. Please click the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks.
And I want to share this with you because this is also important. Let's hear what this is. Dr. Shadi Nasser from Harvard University in America. He is an expert on Quranic studies and as well as the Arabic language. And he's about to give a summary that contradicts what happens in this video. Effectively, these three guys, actually it's not three, it's just two. These two guys, Mansour and Farid Responds, give a very weak defense of the fact that there are obviously different readings of the Quran that were being used. And they say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Trust me, it was revealed in 7 ways. Don't worry about it. And then Dr. Shadi Nasser is added to the end of this clip to explain his view on it. And I want to share that with you now.
This idea that the Quran is preserved word for word, or haraka for haraka, you don't find this kind of opinion in the classical sources. And people will always tell you, well, the Quran is preserved, and inna nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. It means it is protected. Well, sure, but let us go to these sources and tell us what does it mean, preservation. So you go to go to any book of exegesis, go to Zamakhshari, go to Tabari, go to Qurtubi, go to any of those tafsir, and then they will never tell you that this verse means that the Quran is preserved word for word, or haraka bar haraka, or harf bar harf. They never say that. All they say, well, the Quran is preserved from omission and additions. It's preserved from the devils or the shayateen to add something to it. It's preserved that the shayateen would never take anything from it, right? So this whole notion that it is protected, word by word, it's something that is used, for the masses in a sense. And it's not, based on any academic research, not necessarily Western academic. I'm just talking about even academic research by classical Muslim scholars, because they already knew that when you talk about the Quran being preserved word by word, or haraka by haraka, or etc., that we do have many problems and inconsistencies in the tradition regarding those variant readings.
Well, there you go. Quite simply put, that is not something that has any foothold in academia. There is no academic, either in the Western world or the Islamic world, that says, the Quran has been preserved letter for letter, word by word, dot by dot. It's just a theological lie that is told to Muslims to get them to believe something that no one believes is true. And it's amazing, really. Like, if you really think about the scope of what's happening here, there are entire communities of Muslims who have grown up their entire life believing that there is a perfectly preserved singular Quran in Arabic that has never changed at all in any way whatsoever. And yet their own narrations from their own earliest historians who were Muslims, who were very highly regarded scholars of Islam and of history of Islam, say, no, that's not true at all. They never had that view. The early Sahaba, the Tabi'un, and so on and so forth, never had this view that there was some sort of word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot. And the reason they didn't have it is because they were fully aware there were different codexes in use. You had Abdullah ibn Masud, you had Ubay ibn Ka'b. They all had their own codex, and they all had different surahs, and they all had different contents. I mean, you cannot say there was consensus when your own histories tell us there was not consensus. It's a lie. It's just an outright fabrication that's used to make people feel good. It's just like a lovely heartwarming thing that you tell children to make them feel better, and that's really sad. And I really hope that if there are any Muslims watching, you understand the scale of this. You've been lied to in the modern world about what people back then thought about the Quran, the greatest scholars, what they thought about the Quran. I wouldn't want to be a part of a religion that did that. Now, one more thing before I end this video is I want to quickly go into an interesting aspect of the Arabic language. And one of the reasons why there was this contention between the different codexes is because the composite rasm, the very bare Arabic skeleton text, did not have the diacritical marks to differentiate certain words, certain vowels, and pronunciation as well. Now, that's a big issue, and I wanted to show two different videos from two different sources, one Muslim, one Christian, so you could get an understanding here that this isn't coming sort of out of field. This is a very well-known basic fact of Arabic. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to show... I'm going to show the Muslim source first. And then we can go to the Christian one afterwards. So let's have a look at what this Muslim source says. This is from One Path, I think they're called. Here we go.
Exactly the same as the Qur'an we read today, with only one pretty big difference. It didn't include any skeletal or diacritical marks, which are essential in differentiating different words which otherwise look exactly the same.
Right. Real quickly there, he just said the earliest manuscripts, it was just a consonantal rasm, a skeleton text that didn't include diacritical marks. And he said that that was essential for knowing what the word was. Okay, let's continue.
For example, this is the word for elephant, fil, and this is the verb to kiss something, qabbal. However, when you remove the markings, they both look exactly the same. This was how the Mus'haf was written. Now, while...
Okay. I think that was great just to demonstrate the point that you can actually create totally different words depending on where these marks go, right? Because there are certain letters in Arabic that do not have enough difference in how they are in terms of hieroglyphics to differentiate them alone, right? You need the actual dots to make the specific letters in Arabic. So let's continue.
Whilst these diacritical marks weren't invented until 30 years after the death of Uthman, these markings, what are called skeletal dots, were known to the Arabs at the time of Uthman. But he must have intentionally decided not to include them in his original Mus'haf. Now, whilst we don't really know why, one possible reason is that he wanted to ensure that the Qur'an would always be taught and preserved through both written and oral methods. And that's where those official reciters who were sent out with copies of the Mus'haf came into play. Without these...
So just to quickly add here, he's saying that, okay, so the consonantal dots, they've been around for a lot longer than before Muhammad, so they could have used them if they wanted to. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but we do know that there were some examples of these dots appearing in some of the earliest manuscripts. The issue that we have is they're just not widely used. In other words, most manuscripts don't have these dots in most places. So it doesn't really matter if you see it occasionally. The point is that for the majority of the words that are written on the page, you're not going to be able to distinguish between them unless you happen to have been the original author who would have known what the intent was when he wrote it. But anyone who didn't know the author will not know what the original intent of the word was.
Official teachers guiding them, students who studied the Qur'an wouldn't actually be able to read the text. But with both the written text and an official reciter, the Qur'an was now completely standardized and able to be transmitted across the Muslim world.
Okay, so this kind of goes with what I'm saying, that you won't know what it actually says unless you have someone who can tell you what it said. And this is why you have the understanding in the deen that you have the people who had these particular readings and they had narrations of those readings that in turn would keep a sort of oral tradition of that reading. The problem with it, though, is that these aren't standardized, which is odd because he says that it is. Well, I mean, it's standardized in the sense that Ibn Mujahid made it so that there were 7 canonical readings, and this is what we call the Qira'at. But again, why 7? Like, There's no reason to think that. No scholar believes that it's related to the Ahruf, which, according to Islamic hadith, there is supposedly 7 different ways or modes or letters in which the Quran was revealed. But we know the Qur'an is not related to that. This comes a lot longer, like much after Muhammad's death. The issue that we have is that these different ways of reciting do actually change the words. And this is something that we keep pointing out at Speaker's Corner, but people just don't want to listen. You can say, look, I can show you, you can even show contradicting narrations, right? You can show contradicting readings of that same Arabic text, depending on where you put these consonantal dots. There are some that completely abrogate, like others, that contradict others. They'll say things like something did happen, and then a different reading will say something didn't happen. There are ones where it says you are to do something for one person, or in another reading it will say for multiple persons. Obviously, those can't be true; they contradict. So, which one is it? Now, I don't think theologically that's too sort of groundbreaking. Really, I don't think it changes too much. The reason why it's theologically significant is because Muslims still have this idea that it's been perfectly preserved. No one believes this. No one who's ever looked into this still holds this view, or has ever held this view, actually. It's just something that very popular people in Islam have made up and have propagated. And we know this at Speaker's Corner. We can call people out by name who have said things like that. We know Muhammad Hijab has said things like that. We know Mansour has said things like that. We've all seen it and caught it on tape. But unfortunately, it's a big lie. This goes on. This video goes on to basically explain, yep, this is totally fine because we're all saying the same thing. That's not true. That's a lie. They don't say the same thing. And I could do a video showing you the differences. Now, the only last video I want to show real quick is a video where we basically go through the same thing. It comes from a Christian source, but I think it's sufficient to demonstrate a little bit more detail about exactly how the Arabic language works when you start to remove the consonantal dots. Okay, so here we go. Let's have a look at what Jay Smith and Bernie Power say about this.
We have the problem with the Arabic alphabet. You can see here the dots that are there on 22 out of the 28 letters have got, 22 out of the 28 letters can't be distinguished without the dots, otherwise they're the same. If we look at that top line there, you can see it's got an A, it's got 3 little kind of shapes, and then 3 little hooks. Without the dots, that just looks like there's 3 letters, but there's actually 7 letters there. The same with all of the others. You have only 7 unambiguous letters amongst the 28 letters there. And so you can have one word without the dots that's called the rasm, or the basic skeleton, and then when you put the dots in, then you'll come up with multiple meanings. You can put dots above or below 1, 2, or 3, depending on the letter, and you get variant readings. So you get down, sorry, I'll just skip that one, go to this one. Yeah, okay. Variant readings. So you can see in the bottom of the left-hand column, the word she built is bannat, and the word for she destroyed is tabbat. Without the dots, you can't tell whether she destroyed the city or she built the city. It's completely ambiguous. And you can see a whole lot of others there.
Right. So just to summarize this, depending on where you put the dots, it can create entirely different meanings, some of which actually contradicts, like Bernie Power actually says in the video. You can either build something or destroy something, and the rasm might be the same, the continental rasm, but where you put the actual dots determines exactly what that word says. And that's pretty important. And that is why we know there are arguments among the early readers of the Quran who had their own different readings, Abdullah ibn Masud, Nubay ibn Ka'b, because they thought it was different. And those students who came after him agreed that that is the correct reading in comparison to the Uthmanic Codex. They disagreed with them. And they disagreed because they thought that the rasm should be read in one way, another thought the rasm should be read in another way. And that shows you that in any kind of definition you use, the Quran has not been perfectly preserved. It's just a lie. And that's the real sad part of it. Come to Jesus, because in Christianity, we don't have this concept. We don't try and go around saying that the Bible landed from the sky and it's been the same ever since. That's not what Christians say. That's not part of our theology. We don't make lies about scripture to try and justify why people should come to our faith, but rather we're honest about it. We're honest about academia. We work closely with academia. The amount of times I've seen people like Bart Ehrman and a Christian, from whether it's David Ward or whether it's others, who just have this conversation openly because they're not afraid of it. You could see in the earlier video, there was just this tension between what Paul Williams was saying and what Dr. Haitham Sikhi was saying, because he knows he's on shaky grounds and he has to kind of say, well, you know, we've kind of been lying to Muslims for a long time about this now. How do we backtrack? Don't let yourself be lied to, and don't be held captive by a religion that thinks it's okay to lie to you to make you feel better. Always embrace truth, and that truth is Lord Jesus Christ. So I hope you come to him. Have a great day. Take care.